just to begin with here, what we're really going to look at is the imagination. We're going to be focusing on image generating AI. So we're not looking at a large language model. So we're going to be looking at tools such as Adobe Firefly, Midjourney, Bing Image Creator. And I'm sure there's a lot more out there that students have access to, that maybe you have access to. But the concept that I believe is that these image generators can help enhance imaginative engagement. I think when students are creative, when they're using and visualizing things, they're going to be much more engaged in learning the literature you're teaching. They're going to be much more engaged in any classroom that you're in. I believe generative AI can be a bridge to that imagination. What's the importance of this? I think we all have that memory of reading a book and getting lost in that book, getting lost in our imagination. I know that Tolkien, when he wrote his books and they became very popular, he said, like, hey, I don't want anyone making a movie of this. And his reasoning was that it would codify these images of his creations. And he really wanted the reader, the interplay of the reader and his words to create those images. And when Peter Jackson created his Lord of the Rings series, I think many of us can imagine those characters now. And we hear the names of those characters. We have, Peter Jackson's vision in our head. We no longer have our own, we're no longer free to just have it be our imagination. I think one of the benefits of this generative AI is that anytime you do a prompt, it's going to give you slightly different images. It's going to give you a slightly different result. It's not as vast as the human imagination, but it has a little more diversity than simply looking at one artist or one rendition of it. So I think there's some value to what these image generators do in developing one's imagination. So literature can be this path to the imagination. And I think because it is that path, I think it's a good medium to start exploring how we use generative AI to enhance teaching and learning. In the link that I put in the chat, so if you're just getting here, there should be a link in the chat. Thanks, Seth. In the chat, you'll see a link to a Canva doc. It has some resources in there. If you are a research nerd and you want to look into why, imagery in teaching helps, I'm sure we can all assume it does, but there's some research essays in there. There's some research to anchor what we're doing here today. But just on a basic level, the cognitive role of visual imagination enhances critical thinking. It enhances student memory. It enhances and aids understanding of complex ideas. It's going to stimulate creative thinking and strengthen analytical and interpretive skills. And I believe that generative AI sparks these things. Again, it's not as rich as the human imagination, but when we integrate generative AI image creation into our learning, generative AI can spark complex imagery, just like the mind can, just like your imagination can. It's going to help create students have a better reading experience because it's suggestive and it's generative. It's going to generate some digital snapshots based upon the text you put in. And lastly, it can strengthen communication prompt skill. I want to spend some of this time generating images with you. With the prompts. And what I found in the sessions that I've been running is that people make a prompt and then they reiterate that prompt over and over and over again to get what they want. And I think that that's just such a great tool. I think our students, especially after the pandemic, they got used to just being like submission for credit. Hey, we're just going to do it. We're going to turn it in. And there's nothing that I don't think students are getting that experience as much as they used to of redoing things and regenerating things and getting to that final product that they want. And my hope is that you can see some value in how generative AI can create that experience. Again, this is all very basic. I'm not an expert in AI. My understanding of how AI creates these images is that all these images that they're trained on in the internet, or whether it's, I think Adobe Firefly has its own, they're using Adobe stock, but all of these images are tagged with lots of text. And that text is how it comes up when we do searches on Google or searches in Bing. And these texts associated with images is what the AI learns from. So if I put in the text, make me a dragon, it's going to come and create images of a dragon that have never been seen before, but are based upon many different images of dragons. And you can see over here on the left, these are, again, all the images you'll see in my presentation, I used Midjourney to make. And I used a singular AI site simply because I wanted some consistency in the way the images looked. Each one of these different image generators are going to have different value. So what tools can students use to create these images? These are the tools I know of. I know there's a lot more, but Midjourney, Adobe Firefly, DALL-E, which of course powers Bing Image Creator. I know that all of our students have access to Adobe Firefly, so that's what I train my faculty on is Adobe Firefly. Midjourney, I think, has now moved to a paid for only account, so it's a little more accessible. I think the value of the Midjourney images is it produces some great images. I do think it's a little harder to control than, let's say, an Adobe Firefly because you have to code it a little bit more. But Midjourney is my go-to personally. So this is kind of a look at Midjourney. Midjourney is it uses a product called Discord that I'm sure many of your students have used to chat with each other and to play video games. But inside of Discord, there's a Midjourney bot, and that bot, when you prompt it, can generate these images. The images that I'm creating in this video are all quotes from novels and from books and from poetry. So I'm just throwing in different quotes, and you'll see why in a second. So the next video is going to be Adobe Firefly. I'm actually using the same quotes in this video that I used in the next. And I'm going through these rather quickly because I want to get to the meat of this. But this is what Adobe Firefly looks like. And again, you have on the right-hand side, you'll see you have a bunch of different selections. You can reference an image. You can give it a different style. You can say what kind of medium you want it in. I was just working with an art teacher, and he was thrilled because he can have students create different models in here that look exactly like the art and the medium that they're going to work on. Yes, Alex, here, that's the art teacher that took your place. Damn it, you left, but you're here tonight, so that's good. And then Bing Image Creator. My understanding is that Microsoft has many of their AI tools locked down for students right now. They can get to this if they have a personal account. Much like Midjourney, it's going to have a certain number you get for free, and then you have to pay for it. So this is Bing Image Creator. Again, it creates some pretty high quality images based upon text. So let's get some examples. How might I use this in a literary class? How might I use this to teach literature? So in the classroom, if I'm teaching 12th graders, I usually teach a unit on romanticism and the romantic poets. And if I was to teach that unit, there's certain things I'd want them to know. I want them to know about the artistic movement. I'm going to want to teach some poetic devices such as metaphor, simile, personification. And I'm going to teach some certain themes that was important to this group of artists: celebration of nature, emotion, individuality. And so a way that I would use this in the class is that I don't know if any of you have tried to teach poetry to high school students, but oftentimes they don't really care. They're not really into it. They find it hard. You know, that's not how people speak, is what they say. So what I did is I grabbed the entire first part of this Ode to the West Wind, and I threw it into Midjourney. And when you throw in a prompt in Midjourney, it always gives you 4 to choose from and play with. And on the left here, sorry, are the 4 that it came up with for me. And what I love about this is that, you know, some of the themes, some of the things I want them to see in poetry is kind of the tensions between opposites, whether that's light and dark, whether that's the idea of rebirth and death. And Midjourney got it. It has, you know, even in singular images, you see brightness going to darkness. You'll see shadows and you'll see light. You see the personification of the west wind in the bottom left-hand side, and you see a very natural, you know, imagery on the bottom right. It's getting it. It's getting that this is poetry. It's seeing the tensions in the language, and it's producing images that I could use as a hook to start talking about that with students. Now, if you ask students to do this, you have 30 in a class or 20 in a class, and you give them Adobe, they're all going to get different unique images. And this could be a hook for conversation to get them to start looking at close reading of the text. So then I drilled down more. I'm like, okay, what if I just do, stanza by stanza? The first one is introducing, the west wind, personifying the west wind. And you can see it does a good job of that, emphasizing the dead leaves. Um, I'm not going to go on and on about this, but again, it's the same stuff. It's a hook. We can talk about this. We can say what specific words do you think it's pulling out of the text? How do these images align with romanticism? And the kids get to play with a new and innovative tool. The next stanza is very dark. It's emphasizing these colors. It's emotional, and the AI actually is pretty smart. It gets the sense that this is about something that's dying and coming back to life. So we see these zombie-like characters. It's not just corpses. It's getting it, and I like that. And I think that it again, it gives you something to talk about as we go through it. Um, the images are pretty cool. The way in which the AI is playing with it, that it's coming to these results that juxtapose opposites of life and death, rebirth. These are just some of the images. I'm just going to go through it because I'd like to get to the point where we play. I really like this one because to be a destroyer and a preserver, you have to be pretty fierce. I actually threw this quote into a bunch of different generators and it all came up with very similar images. Another strategy. So let's say I'm doing a novel and let's say I teach Love in the Time of Cholera. It's one of my favorite novels to teach. If I was to teach that, some of the themes I'd be going over is this idea of love sickness, aging and death, moral corruption. If I was to take an analytical approach, it'd be historical or psychoanalytical or feminist. Like many novels or creative pieces, it takes place in Colombia, but in a town that doesn't exist. And so I asked AI to create that town for me. I told it I wanted a coastal town in Colombia, similar to Cartagena, and it came up with this image. So perhaps if students are having a hard time imagining a time or a place or a setting, you can ask them to write their own prompts to say, "Hey, I'm looking to look into this." Um, it requires them to look at the text a little bit, to make their own prompt, um, and to come up with some imagery there. Again, I love grabbing quotes from the text, throwing it in there and see what happens. This quote specifically is about the character reflecting upon themselves and reflecting about this idea that we're reborn many times, many different times. And it comes up with some wild images that I think Gabriel Garcia Marquez would be proud of. Continuing on, one of the things that I know we all have to address in AI is this idea of bias. The images are trained on large models that, in some respect, mimic the human imagination and human biases. And in English language courses, one thing we can look at is connotation. So these two prompts, the one on the left and the one on the right, um, they're the same exact prompt, except I changed one word. I changed the word Gatsby to Kareem. So on one, the word Gatsby is there, and the other, the word Kareem is there. And it's giving us very different images. It's giving us a very different sense. One is rich and decadent and hopeful, and the other one is dubious. It's dubious, and we're seeing the person's very different. Of course, the word Gatsby has a cultural meaning. Like if I said that, even if you haven't read the novel, you might know what that means. There's lots of images out there that the AI, I'm sure, is pulling from. But the point I'm trying to make is that it would be a good activity with students to just change one word from a quote. How does that change the way that the AI produces images? Does that change the way that we perceive people or a scene? Or what's the importance of language? And I see that as a real important way of doing the prompt. And this is the prompt that I use. Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eludes us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster and stretch out our arms farther. And then the next one, I just changed Gatsby to Kareem. And this is the images it gives. Very, very different. And I think that's really cool. And then the last example I want to use is just simply painting the scene. I asked Midjourney to give me the studio from the picture of Dorian Gray, and this is what it gave me. And I didn't use word from the text. I said, just give me the studio. And then I grabbed Oscar Wilde's text of his description of the studio, and this is the imagery that Midjourney made. And I just love the differences that it's giving, the ability that this very specific language is painterly. It's beautiful. It's got a lot of feeling to it. And then the next one is some from Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. It's just a scene. It's Pip describing the scene outside of his window. So let's create. So what I'd love to do, and I'll throw the link in the chat in a second, but I have a Padlet, and I don't know what you have access to. I believe I have a poll here. I'd like to know here. I want to know kind of what generative AI tools do you have access to, and you can select one or all to play with. So after watching this, I'd love for you guys to open up one of these image creators and create some images and upload those images to Padlet, and it might give us something to talk about. At this point, if you have any questions or you want to start a discussion, go ahead and jump off of mute and start that discussion.